Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, August 9th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Moe Tkacik, investigations editor at the American Prospect, on our sick system of healthcare. Also on the program today, Nicole Cyrille, audio description narrator, member of the SAG-AFTRA negotiating committee, chair of the LA Performers with Disabilities Committee, on day 26 of the SAG-AFTRA strike. Also on the program, Ohio voters reject Republican Issue 1 in a massive landslide.
Woohoo!
Meanwhile, day 100 of the WGA strike. LA hotel workers in its 6th week of rolling strikes. A major push to amend the Arizona Constitution to protect abortion was launched yesterday. Meanwhile, Supreme Court revives Biden's ghost gun ban. Judge to hear protective order arguments on Friday in Trump's election subversion case. Meanwhile, Georgia DA reportedly seeking a grand jury vote on new indictments next week. After changing campaign leadership for his deteriorating presidential run, Ron DeSantis suspends another state prosecutor. Carrie Lake to enter the Arizona Senate race, joining Sinema and Gallego. And the Biden administration issues new restrictions on investment in China. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. It is, in the famous words of my co-host, Emma Vigland,
It is Hump Day.
That's right. But it's not just any typical Hump Day. Longtime listeners may remember that 18 years ago today, Janine Garofalo announced on the Majority Report on Air America that I was a father of a baby.
Whoa.
Yes, and that baby's name was Mila. And if you have ever listened to the free version of the show, you've heard Mila's voice for probably 10 years now, I think. I think she was like, maybe more. Maybe from the beginning.
Whole time I've been here.
It could have been from the beginning. She was like 4, I think. Or 6. Anyways, happy birthday to Mila Cedar. She is 18.
An adult now.
She is an adult. It took about 30 seconds for her to be awake this morning when she announced that she's going to get a tattoo, and there's nothing that I can do about it, being her father, and also going to get her own PayPal account now so that she can do her Depop. There was a whole laundry list of stuff that she was going to do that I have no control over.
It's like the fall of the Soviet Union.
She's like, and I think you have some money in my savings account.
Well, she's got to get this all squared away before then she goes to college.
She's going to college, just days away, and so it's all coming to the fore, ladies and gentlemen. But with all that said, let's continue. I got another 8 years of having a kid in the house, so
Yeah.
and it's not like
What's it
not
like?
like I'm an empty nester.
Yeah, I mean, you've raised a girl, you're raising a boy now. What's the experience been differently, like with the second kid? You feel a little less anxious all the time, or is that just constant?
I mean, I don't know. You can't make broad generalizations, but I can tell you, like, as far as I can tell, like, boys seem easier, or my boy seems easier, which is not to say that Milo is difficult, but
Yes.
We should try to find those archives, get into those archives, because it is interesting hearing like Sam when he hasn't really been a father yet. It's a different kind of energy, I think.
oh my
It's gotta
God,
be.
totally. Yeah, it's one where I get sleep.
It's like, yeah.
Although Milo was born within a year of my doing
maybe it hasn't
radio.
it hadn't had its effect until like maybe a few years into it. You still seemed a little bit like you didn't have the responsibility of fatherhood on you.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. No, yeah, those days are gone. A lot was beaten out of me over the course of those 18 years. I can tell you that right now. All right. Let's get into this. This is big news. I mean, we've been talking about this Ohio election, or I should say referendum, for a couple of months now, increasingly more as it came closer. It was an amendment to the Constitution to essentially change the mechanism in which Ohio voters had to amend their Constitution. In other words, it has been the case that you need a 50% plus one of the Ohio electorate to amend the Ohio Constitution. There is a referendum to amend the Constitution in Ohio to protect abortion set for November. As a way to preempt this, the Republicans in the Ohio legislature offered this referendum that did not obviously come from citizens. It came from the legislature, which would have raised the threshold to 60. Is it 60%
Yes,
or 60,
60%.
60% plus, essentially? You got to clear 60%.
And that 50% threshold has been in place since 1912.
Yes.
So it obviously suspicious timing, and voters had never had a problem with it up until the Republicans tried to ram this through.
Well, voters didn't have a problem
Right,
with it,
right.
turns out. And we interviewed, who was it from Bolts?
Cameron Joseph. Yeah.
Cameron Joseph last week. And he made it clear that what had happened prior to this is that the Republicans were trying to get rid of the idea of doing August elections because nobody shows up and they're expensive and it doesn't make any sense. Why would you have an August election? Why wouldn't you just punt it to November when you're having other elections? However, the Republicans in the legislature thought that it would behoove them to have one in August because people don't show up for elections in August, except for, if you are a fanatical, usually religious zealot who wants to control other people's sexuality. And in this case, to force women and folks who can get pregnant to carry those pregnancies to birth. And however, it didn't work out that way. I give you Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose trying to put on a happy face
Coping.
on Fox and Friends this morning.
So your initiative would make it harder to change the state constitution. Right now, simple majority, 50% plus, but you wanted it 60%. That failed. What's Ohio telling you?
Well, I tell you what, 1.3 million Ohioans stood with us in another free and fair election. We released the results on election night. That's this thing we do in Ohio. Other states should check out. Proud to say that as Ohio's chief elections officer. But
Wait,
you're right, the
wait.
other side-
They released the results on election night because it was so overwhelming. Because within basically,
smacked.
because within minutes of polls closing, I saw Wasserman tweet out that I've seen enough, and I was like, oh my god, that quickly?
You know what? A lot of Secretary of States have is a real grasp on math, and 1.3 million Ohioans is a lot of Ohioans, unless there were 3 million that voted, in which case you are shy of about 500,000 Ohioans.
Yes.
Which is also a lot of Ohioans.
Yeah, we'll keep going, but just to context, this guy's gonna run against, or is running for Senate and wants to be the Republican representative against Sherrod Brown.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
Free and fair election. We released the results on election night. That's this thing we do in Ohio. Other states should check out. Proud to say that as Ohio's chief elections officer. But you're right, the other side prevailed. This is just one battle in a much larger war, though, because the all-out assault on Ohio is coming from the radical left. I mean, look at the tech billionaires from California and New York that funded the No campaign, and they've got other bad plans. This radical abortion amendment this November that takes away parental rights. They want to bring a minimum wage increase, a massive increase in minimum wage to Ohio that would put Ohioans out of work. And even the mayor of Cleveland said last week, he said the quiet part out loud, they want to do common sense gun reform, which means they want to disarm law-abiding citizens. So, yeah, we lost one battle, but the war continues, and I've just begun to fight.
So, Frank...
It's just, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just completely out of touch. But telling Ohioans, you got to watch out because they're going to come and raise your minimum wage.
Well, you're letting the mask slip a little bit there when you know who he's truly representing is like the business elite or the small business owners.
What does he mean when he says tech billionaires or whatever, bro? Like, look at if you're concerned about that, JD Vance is a Peter Thiel guy. Like,
but they're not. I mean,
I know they're not, yeah.
Like the reality is that the Republican side was the one benefiting most from this out of state money. There were billionaires.
Dick Uihlein.
Uihlein is right. I
flooding the zone for this.
Donated more than $5 million to this particular referendum, or not the referendum campaign, but the efforts to change the state constitution.
Oh, and they were getting robocalls from everyone from Carrie Lake to Mike Pence. I mean, they really flooded the zone. I think there was like slightly more money for the Vote No campaign, slightly. But I got news for you. There was not 57 to 43% more money, right. Not even remotely close. 3 million people, just to put this in context, in the 2022 election, granted an off-year election, J.D. Vance beats Tim Ryan. 4 million people voted. In this election, 3 million. To have like that number of people come out and vote on a random August day is pretty stunning. And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens when the radical left raises the minimum wage in Ohio, or when they try and, I mean, I think you're going to start seeing a lot more of these referendums. And in fact, in Arizona, literally yesterday, as the results were coming in Ohio, there was a submission for a constitutional amendment in Arizona to protect abortion rights there. I think they have a ban on abortion now that's like a 12-week, I think it is. Maybe it's 16-week. I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head. But in Arizona, that vote theoretically would come up in 2024 in the general election. And that is both great strategy from a general election strategy and for a strategy for beating Kristen Sinema and Carrie Lake, who are going to be running against Gallego for senator out of Arizona. It's also a great strategy because Arizona is one of the swing states that's going to make a difference in the presidential election. And it's also a great strategy because all of that electioneering is also going to help if this amendment gets the signatures and is worded in the proper way is going to help protect a woman's right to choose, or a person who can get pregnant right to choose to end their pregnancy, as opposed to be forced to give birth in those situations. So this is really encouraging. In an otherwise bleak, bleakness of climate change and whatever it is of the judiciary shutting down student debt relief and whatnot. But this is Ohio voters came out and made a very, very large statement last night, or yesterday, I should say. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Moe Tkacik. She's the investigations editor at American Prospect. The American Prospect has put together the August issue. Is if you want to become somewhat of an expert, that's a bit of hyperbole.
A wonk.
But if you really want to understand some of the key issues involved in why healthcare is so problematic in this country, in terms of cost and delivery, do yourself a favor and go check out that issue. We're going to be talking to Moe about sort of a broad sweep of what they discussed in that issue in just a moment. We'll be right back after this. And just a reminder, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you get the free show for your commercials, and you get the fun half. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, you get 10% off. Okay, we'll be right back. We are back. Sorry for the delay. Had a little bit of technical difficulties. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Want to welcome back to the program Moe Tkacik. She's the investigations editor at the American Prospect, and she has been she's been writing a lot of stuff about healthcare. Moe, in this August 2023 issue of the Prospect magazine, I was just telling people before the break, and just to remind them, you guys have done essentially like almost like a 360 of our healthcare delivery system and some of the real illnesses that are embedded within that system. Let's just start with an overview of everything, because you sort of cover like 3 or 4 major silos of the healthcare industry.
Yeah, I think that the easiest way to think about our healthcare system is that it's an incredible crime story. And that's, we've been writing a lot of stories in addition to the ones in this issue, kind of hitting at this fact. I think that one of the biggest problems with the healthcare journalism that you see in most mainstream outlets is that it takes the policy almost too, it's almost too well good faith. It takes the idea that we're actually trying to improve healthcare, that we have institutions that are built to improve healthcare outcomes and regulate our healthcare institutions sort of at face value, when actually the system was sort of, since at least going back to at least like the 60s or 70s, it was kind of invented by crooks, and it was certainly perfected by crooks. And some of them were actual like all out mobsters, and others were just sort of very clever loophole exploiters and white collar criminals. But there's just an incredible amount of activity, and this is the reason it costs so much. There's so much involved in our healthcare system that makes money for it, that makes money for investors, is actually illegal, or would be illegal if laws were enforced. And it's that aspect to it that makes it so profitable. And these laws just simply, especially in the past 10 years, I would say, enforcement has been kind of at an all-time low. So what you get is just an incredible universe of middlemen that have figured out ways to extract a cut. There's the patient, and there's the doctor and the nurse, and there's the hospital, there's equipment, and then in between all of that stuff, there's just this incredible universe of really profitable middlemen, and most of what they do is technically illegal. Because it doesn't add any value. It usually subtracts value. It makes it much more difficult for doctors to practice. It makes it much more difficult for nurses to save lives, and it's making us sicker. It is causing our life expectancies to plunge, and it is causing our Medicare system to sort of be insolvent. And so that's really what we wanted to hit on, is what are all of these middlemen. And that's why we have one really big story that is dedicated to exploring United Healthcare. So basically that's essentially what the theme of the issue is about. And we'll be hitting on this a lot more, because the problem is that if you impose Medicare for all, if you try to impose sort of some well-meaning reform upon this system, it would only benefit the criminals who are making money off it right now. Most of our Medicare is going in the direction where most people with Medicare have Medicare Advantage plans. So it's a privatized system, and it's making a small number of people extremely rich, and everyone else is getting sicker.
All right, and so to be clear, so that people understand this, this is not about health insurance per se. The health insurance sort of rides on top. I'm not sure conceptually if it rides on top or on bottom, but it doesn't matter. It is a distinct sort of level of bureaucracy that we have now that certainly adds cost by the time it reaches, I guess the government's wallet or our wallet, or but it is not the fundamental. Well, I should say it's not the exclusive problem, because as you say, we could have Medicare for all, which is an insurance solution, but we would still have this underlying system that is so problematic. Do you want to start with, is it easiest to start with United Healthcare? Because we should say also that the history of this was that the AMA, if my understanding is, for much of the first half and a little more of the 20th century, wanted to keep medicine from being corporatized, and really so that the profits would stay sort of like in these small businessmen, the doctors. And it created sort of a system that was really ripe to be corporatized and financialized and taken advantage of. And that started to happen as we get into the 70s and 80s, and then more so into this century.
Right. If you looked at the AMA, if you look at the AMA back during, most of the Cold War, that was the big healthcare monopoly, and they were an incredibly malevolent enterprise in a lot of ways. Their big enemy was socialized medicine, right? And they were one of the most powerful sort of anti-communist lobbies that existed, and they had one of the, aspects of their power, that one of the things that made them so powerful was that to join the AMA, you had to join your county medical society. So there were 2,000 county and local medical societies, and they kind of ran the affairs of healthcare in whatever their county was. And most of the hospitals were county owned at the time. And this kept the AMA very powerful, keeping everybody else kind of small. Doctors were small, group practice was shunned, early HMOs were oftentimes sabotaged by the medical societies. They really wanted to keep the system in place. And what it did, in hindsight, the benefit that this created, to keep the AMA strong, they needed to keep doctors small and in their place. And so they did create this situation where it was a very sustainable business model to just be a sole practitioner, to be a family doctor, to be in private practice. Then the HMO Act comes along in the 70s, and there's a lot of other things. First, the passage of Medicare was really important. And the fact that the AMA worked so hard when things like the Hill-Burton Act created most community hospitals, or funded most community hospitals in the 40s and 50s, the Medicare, the creation of Medicare and Medicaid. But the actual way that these programs were designed was to keep the intrusion of the federal government extremely light. So when Medicare was created, it was sort of built on this Blue Cross system where you billed Medicare for what you said that the cost of the care that you provided was, and they paid you for it. There was not a whole lot of utilization review. There was not a whole lot of what we consider to be regulation. Then in comes this thing called the HMO Act. And this is, the Nixon administration's desperate attempts to get healthcare costs under control after they passed Medicare and Medicaid. And it was designed by this guy named Paul Elwood, this consultant in Minnesota, who really believed that you could unleash the powers of the free market to contain the cost of healthcare and incentivize healthcare providers to not overtreat patients, because that was a big problem at the time. Unnecessary hysterectomies and appendectomies were a big source of extra income to shady doctors. The HMO Act was supposed to kind of create a system of like Kaiser Permanentes, but instead it sort of created.
I know this is going to sound remedial, but will you just explain what a HMO is to people? Because I don't know that people know what a Kaiser Permanente is. I mean, I've been wading through this for 35 years, and I still can't quite figure out what's what.
Right. I think like the idea of it. So HMO is a health maintenance organization, and it's just one place. It's sort of a one-stop shop where you're supposed to take care of most of your medical needs for a flat fee by the month. And the idea is that all of the doctors work on a salary, and nobody is incentivized to do unnecessary stuff. give you unnecessary tests, do unnecessary surgeries, apply you with unnecessary drugs. And Kaiser
and the
Permanente,
HMO gets paid by essentially the insurance companies to be there and provide these services for their clients, essentially.
The HMOs were mostly established by, and they would get paid by the employer. So Kaiser was formed by a steel company, Kaiser Steel, and they had a lot of steel mills and shipyards in areas that didn't have hospitals. So they're, the tycoon of Kaiser Steel decided to create his own sort of health care organization for his employees, and it worked actually pretty well because in those days, all of his laborers were unionized. They were working for, him for likely 20, 30 years. So he had this he really was incentivized to try and keep them healthy, keep their long-term healthcare costs down. And he also wasn't as quite the asshole that you get in the healthcare industry today. By the time the HMO comes along, they've decided that they can do this system, they can do this health maintenance organization thing without putting it all under one roof, without making it look so much like a national health system or a walled garden, the way that Kaiser is. And they basically just, what it did, it was created this new type of unregulated insurance that didn't have to, it was exempt from corporate practice of medicine laws in states. And it wasn't, the HMO Act that passed was very it was short, it was not particularly specific, and there was no funding. So it was sort of this idea that they wanted to let 100 flowers bloom. And they created this mandate where every employer had to set up an HMO and try and experiment with ways to deliver healthcare to employees that in a more cost-effective fashion. Well, Paul Elwood, the consultant who invented this whole thing and basically wrote the law, he had a protege, Richard Burke, and Richard Burke had a company called United Healthcare. And one of the things about, most HMOs were supposed to be nonprofit. That was the whole idea, that they were going to be nonprofit. But there was this little loophole, and they said, well, maybe it's okay if a for-profit company comes in and runs the HMO. And, before you know it, this guy, Richard Burke, is taking 17% of the revenues across the board, an unheard of amount, an unheard of take at the time in health insurance. There were a lot of Blue Cross systems in the 70s that took an overhead of 3%. So this was really kind of paving, blazing new trails. And basically the business model was simple: pay doctors less, don't pay them at all if you can get away with it, and ration care, make it much more difficult to access healthcare, just deny claims, and you can always make money that way. There's been many efforts to reform HMOs, and then at some point, I think sort of like leveraged buyouts became private equity. They dropped the HMO. The HMOs got very toxic in the media in the 90s because there were so many horror stories of people getting denied life-saving care by these HMOs. But essentially, that's still the system. They call them PPOs now, or they call them, what have you. But essentially, if you can have your claim denied by your insurance company, which I think all of us can, it's an HMO in reality. And these systems, these insurance policies are regulated by ERISA, not by any sort of insurance regulator. And it's this whole, mess. But United Healthcare is really the Moby Dick, right, of our corporate healthcare system. They're the biggest employer of doctors right now. They control so many aspects of healthcare and healthcare delivery, and they make just an enormous amount of money. They make it extremely difficult for doctors to have a sustainable practice in almost any specialty these days, because they just lowball you. And so that's one of the big things that drove all this private equity investment in healthcare, was that private equity knew that they would have the leverage to negotiate with players as big as United Healthcare. And they got a lot of doctors in a lot of different specialties to sell out, and immediately, and so this is, you know, just one of the many different things that just by understanding United Healthcare, you can understand a lot of everything else that in the system that ails us.
Okay, and we should say that you have pieces on how the sort of like hedge funds and these type of outfits have influenced the emergency room. I guess there's a company, American Physician parties, and then the family medicine sort of physician, or the disappearing family medicine physician, as well as Express Scripts, like that relationship between drug manufacturers, and by the time that we get to it. So, I mean, tell us about like the concept. I guess vertical integration is really, when you're talking about United Healthcare, that's what we're talking about, is this sort of where it's all lining up there. But where, like, where does this sort of like new financialization that is coming in with these hedge funders, are they just replicating the United Healthcare model? Or are they like almost like just a different beast, but functioning in the same way?
Well, what you find with like the, you have to find loopholes, and in any system, I mean, United Healthcare, for instance, they have friends, they have, they have ancillary businesses. There's a lot of conflicts of interest. So, one of my other stories is about basically really expensive, dubious drugs, or sometimes just really expensive drugs that are necessary, but they're obscenely expensive. The sort of the rise of 6-figure and now 7-figure a year drugs, some of which are, vital, life-saving pills that are just priced too high, some of which are extremely dubious. And I focus on this one drug called Acthar, which was a big scandal a couple years back. It's $40,000 a vial. It's very it's a life-saving drug when it comes to infant epilepsy, but it was being prescribed all over the place for God knows what, any number of things. And why are we prescribing this very like dubious drug that is not FDA approved, off-label, for multiple sclerosis and all of these other indications, when it costs $500,000 a year? Who's doing this? Who's allowing this? And if you really probe this, and there's hundreds of drugs that are in this camp, what I learned was that of all people, Martin Shkreli actually was trying to bust this cartel back before he bought Daraprim and hiked the price of that drug. So famously, he was a short seller, and he and a lot of other short sellers specialized in shorting scammy pharma companies that he thought, and this was the scammiest of the scammy pharma companies, this company that made Acthar called Questcor. And he decided he was going to kind of fund in addition to shorting Questcor stock, he was going to fund an alternative to this scammy drug called Acthar, give it away for free and bust their business, and also, be a good guy in the process. He went a different route, and the story is really interesting as to why. But ultimately, the mystery is, why did these drugs persist? And, there's a lot of drugs like this. There's a drug that there's a deal that the FTC is trying to block right now, but Amgen Horizon merger. Horizon Pharmaceuticals is known, or Horizon Therapeutics is known for really scammy, really high-priced drugs. They sell a combination of Advil and Pepcid AC, and then another drug that's similar, that's like a combination of Nexium and Aleve. And they sell these drugs for $3,000 a bottle. And the question is always, who's paying for this? Why is my endoscopy exam, or why is my colonoscopy exam being denied by my insurance company, but my insurance company at the same time is approving these claims for these absurd drugs that have no business sort of being in circulation even? And it goes back to these little understood entities called the pharmacy benefit managers, another kind of middleman, right? That shouldn't exist, doesn't exist anywhere else. But these these entities are owned by insurance companies. United Healthcare owns one, and Cigna owns the one that's the subject of our story, Express Scripts. And they have these ancillary businesses that kind of specialize in high-priced drugs, like Acthar or Actimune. There's all kinds of orphan drugs.
So wait, the PBMs own these, are basically owned by the same entities that own these drugs, or
they're the distributors, and they make a cut.
Okay. And they make a cut. And
Closing
okay.
It's a very, but when you find out, so essentially it's conflicts of interest, right? That are generating all this money. And
if you get a percentage of a high-priced drug,
yes,
and you're the guy who's responsible for saying to different entities, whether they're hospitals or pharmacies, I've got 2 drugs for this, you're going to push the high price one because, of course, it puts more money in your pocket. That's like,
exactly.
it's just basic math, essentially. So, all right, so let me ask you this. We have all these middlemen who have come in. We have the financialization of these lot of things, of hospitals and hospital groups. We have hospital groups being diminished and being replaced with telemedicine. We have all of these different things. What are the key laws that are on the books that exist today that could be implemented to sort of fix some of these problems? Or are they, and I assume they're in the sort of the antitrust and anti-competitive realm, or other laws, or are there any other proposals that are out there to sort of here's 3 laws that are going to hit these different sections of the way that our medicine's delivered, essentially?
So I think that the biggest area really is the Medicare fraud laws. Right. We don't really enforce our Medicare fraud laws. Our primary mode of enforcement is something called the KETOM system. Is we allow employees of companies that are doing Medicare fraud to file these whistleblower lawsuits. And occasionally the DOJ will intervene in a lawsuit and, have the employee wear a wire and get, into it. And ultimately what usually happens, almost always happens, if the DOJ actually does intervene, is the company agrees to pay a settlement. The settlement is almost always a tiny fraction of the amount that was actually stolen from the system. And the DOJ increasingly just doesn't intervene in cases. And it must be a problem of resources. A lot of it is also, I think, a cultural problem. But this is a huge issue. Hundreds of billions of dollars are going missing from our, healthcare system in fraud and abuse. And we're clawing back like $5 billion in a good year. So those laws need to be strengthened. In the 90s, we had thousands of FBI agents working Medicare fraud cases. That is just not happening now. And it's creating the situation where it's impossible to be an honest healthcare provider. It's kind of like the crooks, the mafia dons are really, they're the ones who know how to work the system. So I think that is the biggest thing, is just, and it's boring to say we need more enforcement. We need to enforce those laws that are on the books, but this would definitely deter a lot of behavior. In the realm of private equity taking over medicine, medical practices, there are laws called corporate practice of medicine laws on the books in most states, pretty strong ones on the books in 30 states. These laws are not enforced. The enforcement is complicated because it involves these non-governmental bodies, the medical boards of states. But a lot of doctors have really started, brushing off these statutes and saying, hey, if we enforce this law, wouldn't my practice be illegal? Wouldn't, the hospital down the street that's hiring nurse practitioners and telling them that they have to, run all of these unnecessary tests on every patient in the ER waiting room if they have good enough insurance, isn't that illegal? A lot of things would be illegal if these statutes were enforced. And a year ago, I would have said corporate practice of medicine laws, that's not, that's sort of those have never been enforced. When they have been enforced, it's usually been for bad. But doctors really have embraced this, especially in the emergency medicine field. And I think that where you get a lot of highly educated, highly motivated people in, trying to get into the system and trying to change it, that's where we're likely to see the most reform is in avenues like that. So I'm definitely looking a lot at corporate practice of medicine laws. They've been undermined by the FTC in a lot of with a lot of decisions that they've made, and I think that today's FTC is likely to take to be much more helpful, much more encouraging about how these laws could actually really help competition in medicine. But that's probably another avenue. Otherwise, we need.
I mean, this is, a lot of this sounds to me sort of like where we were talking about antitrust in like 2015 and 2014, where there was like a growing understanding that a lot of what was inhibiting the economy and hurting the economy was this sort of like increasingly concentration of corporate power, corporate and wealth. And it was a burgeoning sort of like movement. This feels like something that in a second term of a Biden administration is going to get a lot more attention. But in the meantime, it really is just the whole magazine, or at least what I've read from it, and the work that you've done here, really, really impressive. If folks want to understand these problems, this is the best place to start. Moe Tkacik, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. We'll put links to all of this in this month's episode. I should say this month's edition of the American Prospect. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, Nicole Cyrille will be here. She is an audio description narrator and a member of the SAG-AFTRA negotiating committee. It is day 26 of the SAG-AFTRA strike, day 100 of the WGA strike. We're going to get an update on what's been happening, what the issues are, and more. We'll be right back after this. We're back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Let me just say, what I meant to say when we left for the break was we're going to put links to that this edition of the August magazine of the American Prospect and all of these articles in today's episode of our podcast and YouTube descriptions. I'm having a rolling stroke. I don't know what to say. It's been happening for like 2 weeks. Joining us on the program, Nicole Cyrille. She is an audio description narrator, a member of the SAG-AFTRA negotiating committee, chair of the Los Angeles Performers with Disability Committee. I appreciate you joining us. Right about now, I think, or maybe like 20 minutes ago, is when the picket lines opened up in LA. I believe they're just closed in New York. Full disclosure, I'm a member of SAG-AFTRA, just to say that so that people know my biases. But I don't think if people are paying attention, I think they would have picked up on that. Nicole, give us we've talked about this on the program, but give us a brief rundown of what the major issues are for SAG-AFTRA. We can expand that a little bit to the extent that you're aware of in terms of the WGA, but just give us those sort of like the bullet points that are the big issues.
Okay. Well, first, thank you for having me on the show. And, what we're really asking for is dignity and respect and to be treated fairly in our industry and to continue to be able to have a career in this industry. To that end, we need to raise our minimums. Our minimum pay right now, the raise that they're offering us at this point, would mean that we would be making in real dollar value 5% less than we made in 2020. Our dollar would go so much less than it did then, and it's already difficult to feed our families on what we make. As you heard, I've seen, you had Andrew Leeds on the show, and I've seen you guys talk about the fact that 26% or $26,000 is what we need to qualify for healthcare, and 87% of our members do not qualify for healthcare.
It's insane.
And talk, if you will, about how the industry has changed. Back when I was doing sitcoms, it was very straightforward stuff. You had, at that time, 5 networks, the studios, and I was doing this when the FinCEN laws were rescinded, and basically, studio would hire you. They would sell the show to the network. The network would play it for, if it got to 4 seasons or 5 seasons, the studio would then sell it in syndication. If it went on like that, you would get residuals. And so if you did a show that was getting residuals, it would take you through the lean times because, I'm known as the dad, and I'm not going to, I may not get another job because I'm so well known as the dad. I can get one job here for a day or two. But that all changed with streaming, and walk us through that change.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, we used to have linear network TV where we had 20 some episodes a season, and then you had the summer off, and maybe you did a movie, maybe you didn't, maybe you took summer off with your kids, but you were able to sustain through residuals and that, as you mentioned, magical syndication. Where we are now is that magical syndication is move over to streaming, and as they do, well, we don't know what streaming is going to pay, so please help us out. That's not how you run a business. You take on that risk, but they put it on us. So now with streaming, we don't get those residuals. And I hope you guys have seen a lot of actors that you recognize have been very open on social media now with their residual checks for pennies and some for negative pennies. So now when it moves over to streaming, we're not making money. The cast of Stranger Things has other jobs, and it's one of the biggest shows on Netflix. So one of the key things that we're asking for, or demanding, I should say, is revenue share. We're building your platforms. We are the reason that your platforms are growing and worth billions of dollars, and we're getting pennies.
What has the studio's kind of explanation been to you guys in the sense of their lack of transparency about how many people are actually watching this stuff?
Right. So they have never been upfront with that when it comes to streaming. And they really haven't communicated with us on this issue. So when we went into negotiations, they dealt with the smaller issues. And as Fran has spoken in interviews saying, we thought we were going to deal with the smaller issues and then get to the bigger things. They refused to engage. They absolutely refused to engage on this topic. We're asking for 2% of revenue share, 2%. It's such a small number for them, and they refuse to give us that information.
And it seems to me, there's a lot of different ways in which they could do this. They certainly know if they don't want to share with people how well a specific show is doing, which they're probably, I have no doubt that it's less than people generally think. Stranger Things, extremely popular show, but it's not MASH from 1987 or something. And it may be, but highly unlikely. And so they have their own metrics as to what the value of any given show is. But we know what their revenue is on any given year, right? Because it's X time, whatever, it's $10 a month, let's say, for Netflix. They've got 1 million subscribers.
Right.
Then we know that it's $120 million a year or something. Has the, how much has the discussion been okay, look, you don't want to tell us what the numbers are because you're afraid that's going to tank your stock options and Sarandos or whomever it is, that's how you get paid. Fine. You can maintain that fiction if you want, but you need to come up with a system that will obscure, you can make it up if you want. If you want to say but this is the minimum of the share from all the shows on your platform. you divide it up that way. If you want to give a bonus to some, that hit some benchmark that you make up in your head, I mean, can they do that? Or are they just refusing to just share this money in any way, shape, or form?
Well, yes, they're refusing to share this money in any way, shape, or form, but they already have the analytics with third-party companies, and we've been open about it. There's a company called Parrot Analytics, and these platforms hire Parrot to analyze what a show is bringing to their platform. So they have all the metrics. They know if we put this on, if we put Friends on for this month, that's going to be the big boost to get subscribers. Then we can pull it off and we can put it back on X amount of months later to then again get that boost. They know all that. And using companies like Parrot, we would have access to that information, and therefore we would be able to equitably divide it up based on performance. And when you're talking about, MASH, that was based on the commercial ad revs, right? So we're just shifting where that revenue is coming from for how we do that calculus, and they're refusing to engage.
What's incredible is that this data should be even more straightforward than like the Nielsen rate, or whatever the systems were previously to gauge viewership that would then drive advertising. Because all of this data has to be tabulated, as easily as possible, just given the fact that it's all computerized at this point.
Well, they know, but it's really a question of like if the Nathan Fielder show doesn't necessarily have a lot of viewers, but there's a lot of people writing about it, then you subscribe to the service because the service is in there. So there's a lot of lost leader in this, but nevertheless, there is a metric for this. They know the value of these shows to them. That's how they run their business. It doesn't necessarily ascribe to X number of viewers. It's some combination. Gotcha. So let me ask you this other question. There was a time where the producers were largely, not exactly, but their incentive structure and their business model was aligned. But now you have like old Hollywood models and these sort of more tech models with the streaming. Is this, from your perspective, an opportunity where they're going to have less sort of durability in hanging out, like where in terms of like this, this is going to be a really long, I think, battle. But their cohesion, do you anticipate that they're going to start maybe to pull apart a little bit? Because Netflix may have a different agenda than Amazon, and Amazon may have a different agenda than Hulu because of the way that their models are different. And they all have a very different model than, say, like, I don't know, maybe Paramount, unless, depending on which one is put which eggs in which basket.
Well, you said something a minute ago that really speaks to this, is that they're working for their shareholders. They're not, the model has changed to that degree that they're looking for their bottom line to make their bonuses for their shareholders. The audience doesn't play as much of a role, and our participation doesn't play as much of a role. So when you talk about these streamers and network having a different business model and will they split? I don't know. We're not in their room. We can't hear them talk. There are reasons that makes sense, and there are reasons that they might not choose to do it. But when you talk about how long this strike might go, if we were back in linear, we know that if we're not back to work by Labor Day, we're not having a fall network. We're not having a fall season. And when you're talking about streaming, which puts us into a whole nother issue that we're working on in the room, it's that they're not functioning under a set structure. So you have actors who are leads on shows that work 6 to 10 episodes, and they may not go back to work for 18 months, but they're held on exclusivity. So that makes it harder for us to make a living because they're exclusive and they're only working 10 shows in 2 years. But also it changes where their needs are for how fast they want to end this strike.
Right.
Because we don't know what do they value Oscar season? Do they value the Christmas movie? Do they value linear network, fall season? At this point, we're waiting to find out.
And is one of the terms, that issue of like shows, the way that they develop shows and the way they commit to shows has changed dramatically from the linear days, as you call them. But the holds on actors and frankly on writers hasn't seemed to have changed at all. And there's different issues in terms of like actors and writers, because, if you can get an actor, you're going to shoot with them next week. You got them. They're on, with a writer, you need a certain more lead time and anticipation associated. So slightly different issues. But for SAG-AFTRA, is this question of like exclusivity or terms or pay to play, are these in the mix as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Holding actors on exclusivity, like I said, for up to 18 months is untenable. We can't afford to feed our families on that, right? So that is absolutely part of our negotiation. Again, it's dignity and respect, treating us with dignity and respect. Look, as you mentioned, I'm the chair of the Performers with Disabilities Committee in Los Angeles, and I'm a voiceover artist, partly because they don't hire people with disabilities. Like, we're 25% of the population. We are 3% of scripted characters. Of that 3%, and I'm about to tell you, only 2% of those are played by disabled actors, and that's because things are getting better. That's how small the number is of getting better. And a lot of times you'll hear, well, they're not written. Okay, it doesn't have to be written. Does it matter if the three of us sitting here, if any of us are disabled? No. I mean, I am. I walk with a cane or sometimes use a wheelchair, but it doesn't have any bearing on sitting here doing this show. So they don't look at that. They don't look at those opportunities. And that just is the canary in the coal mine about dignity and respect and how they don't treat us with it, right? When we talk about audio description, the voiceover work that I do, because people with disabilities get more voiceover work, audio description is absolutely covered under our contract, but the AMPTP refuses to acknowledge it, and we are insisting that they do.
Let's talk briefly about interim agreements. There's a little bit of, and this may be a little bit of inside baseball, but I don't think it's too inside baseball. In fact, I just got an email as a member of SAG-AFTRA that there's going to be a webinar tomorrow, I think, about interim agreements. But explain what these are, because there are, folks have been publicly saying, asking questions like, is this helpful? Explain to us what interim agreements are, and then let's talk about, to the extent that there's controversy as to the questions of, is it helpful? Does it maintain solidarity, et cetera?
Absolutely. So the interim agreement is a contract that can be used right now, and it's the terms from the last time we pushed across the table. So the last package that we said, here's our responses, here's where we want it. The 11% minimums increase, for example. That's what that interim agreement is. So when we say you can apply for an interim agreement, our staff will then go through with the applications and make sure that none of the projects are connected to the AMPTP. They are truly independents. And when they go through that, then they go through our normal vetting process to get approved by SAG. And then they have an interim agreement. And they're working under the contract that we put across the table to the AMPTP that they refused on the final night, July 12th. So they're working under that interim agreement with all the pieces there. The change in exclusivity, the revenue share, all of those pieces are included in that. So that shows the industry that these contracts are tenable.
They're not so onerous that they can't be implemented. Well, what of the argument that when you do that, though, because they may be independent, but ultimately they're going to sell to somebody, and they're going to end up being on, running on Hulu or Amazon or Apple or Netflix or whatever it is. What about like sort of the calculation that it decreases leverage because it's providing content for these platforms, and B, it makes it harder to maintain solidarity amongst all of SAG-AFTRA workers, because they're not all, you're talking about a limited number of people, and there are a certain amount of like stars and names who are not going to be on the picket lines because they're going to be working on these productions.
Well, I understand that, and I think that's just from lack of information. And to that end, we probably should have had this webinar a little earlier than we are having it tomorrow. But keep in mind, the revenue share is additive. So we have also asked for increases in streaming residuals. All of that applies. So if and when they do sell those projects to streaming, those residuals, that revenue share still applies. So if they choose to buy it, they then choose to air it, they are agreeing to those pieces that we've put in. They can't just air it under the
streaming
old
platforms.
term.
The streaming platforms themselves are essentially agreeing to the terms, and they're basically showing that we can theoretically agree to these terms, or not even theoretically, I guess, literally agree to these terms for this amount of shows, and so we have the ability to do this stuff.
Absolutely, and these are truly independent projects. So, yes, there are names that work, but there's more so not names that are working. Your actors that, are the journeyman, the struggling actor, they're working on these projects. Imagine, you have one name on a film, maybe two, and all the rest of those actors are working. All the rest of those writers, are getting paid for their script. All the rest of the crew that is put out of work right now because we're on strike, they're getting jobs from this. So, when we talk about the residual change, my neighbor is an actor that you would all recognize from shows you love, like Superstore. And he's slinging pizza because of how much our industry has changed.
Yeah, it's amazing. And just talk for a moment. We have recently had a Yahtzee members that was on live productions unionized. But the idea that the WGA is out there on the picket lines with the actors. It's been a long time since SAG-AFTRA been real. I mean, for an extended strike like this, I think we're now at like 40 years or something, maybe more actually. And the writers 15 years ago or so, but the writers it seemed to me, were not as cohesive as they are today. And just the sort of the labor movement itself, at least within the context of Hollywood, was not as cohesive as it is today. On Friday of last week, the producers met with the writers, and there was it really felt like they were trying to sort of like drive a wedge, like force the writers to say that we will not go back until SAG-AFTRA is resolved, which it seemed to me, and this was all leaked by the producers, it seemed to me to be a technique to try and create dissent within the WGA. What is your sense of both the solidarity that you're seeing from the writers and just sort of like how much solidarity you're seeing just within both unions?
Yeah, it's amazing. We haven't had a big strike on this contract or any strike since the 80s. And when you talk about the writers and the actors out together, that was 1960. That's when we got residuals, pension, and health. So it's been a long time, and they were very powerful when it happened. The playbook of the AMPTP seems to be to try to divide. They did that with their offers to us, try and divide our groups. And as the writers have said, we're the same. We're not making a deal that leaves any of our membership behind. We're not going to make a deal that helps most of our union, but not all of our union. And they try to divide us now with the writers, and it's not going to work. It's such a beautiful thing. First of all, from our group, Fran Drescher is an incredible leader. What I love about Fran is that she's doing the right thing simply because she believes it's the right thing. It doesn't matter what she thinks it may or may not do to her career. It is literally to help everyone. And Duncan Crabtree Ireland is incredible to watch as our lead negotiator. So our negotiating committee is in lockstep with each other constantly. Our unity is fierce. When they tried to separate us by groups, by offering certain things to some parts of our membership and not to others, we all stood together. As I mentioned, I'm very active in audio description, and we're all in that together, even though I'm the main person on our committee about it. And you have to ask, just as a side note about audio description, it's like, if you were to hire me to read to your kids, would you pay me less because your kids are blind? That's what the AMPTP thinks, right? So where's their respect for just individuals? Now, as far as on the line, it is incredible. You see videos and photos of us laughing and smiling and doing karaoke on the picket line. It's not because we want to be on strike. This was a last call. This is because we had to. We had no option. So what do? We're making the best of it. And the writers, some writer friends of mine tell me this shot in the arm of just the sheer volume of actors that have joined on the line, it's creating more of a unity. And I think the more they let us create that bond, the harder it's going to be for them to break us ever. I think this is creating a whole new hot labor summer, a whole new community in our industry that is going to be hard to break moving forward.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, I've experienced it firsthand just personally, but it hadn't really occurred to me the implications of it on a broader scale, that opportunity just you got writers and actors socializing in a way that, writers don't socialize that much. But Nicole Cyrille, audio description narrator, a member of SAG-AFTRA negotiating committee and chair of the Los Angeles Performers Disability Committee. Thanks so much for your time today. People can go to SAG-AFTRA-strike.org, and it will provide information as to where the picket lines are. I can say, just as having been on those picket lines, when people drive by and honk their horns, you really can't appreciate how much the people who are picketing enjoy people blaring their horns, because it just amplifies their voices. So go out there, bring a pizza or some water or just honk your horn. But I really appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks for having me. All
right, folks. I'm going to take a quick break. Head into the fun half of the program. Number 646-257-3920 is the number. Just a reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member and join themajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only get the the free half free of commercials, you get the fun half. And you can IM the show. I will say this. We keep getting spammed. I'm going to read this once.
Okay.
And then I'm going to tell this person, do not keep sending it. For Sam, it's pronounced Nabiki Tendo. Hi, I'm new here. I hope this works. Yeah, we've read this IM like 3 weeks ago. I'd recommend you have on Andrew Seidel. He's a constitutional attorney, wrote the book American Crusade, How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. We have that down, right?
We have good news for you.
Oh, we're doing it this afternoon.
Yes, we're doing a pre-record, right?
Yes.
So that interview is coming.
It's literally booked. It's coming in a week. I thought we were doing somebody different for that pre-record. Okay. So do not, under any circumstances, tweet us the same, or IM us the same IM 30 times.
Yes.
Because if it's effective in catching our eye, it will also be incredibly irritating. And I will literally, I don't know how we could ever do this in terms of blocking somebody on our IM, but we will develop a technology.
Yes.
No, we should probably not tell people that we can't do
that. Good point.
I mean, or theoretically we can do it.
And if we hadn't had Andrew booked for the pre-record today, then honestly, based on your spamming, we might have
Maybe we should cancel anyway.
We might have just, right.
Sorry.
Not done it.
One of your fans, partisans, is too annoying.
Nabiki Tendo said it too many times, so we gotta cancel you. I just got. I'm warning folks right now. I just saw that I got a text from Kyle, and so when I see a text from Kyle with that type of when I say something technical, it means that he's already figured it out.
Oh. It
means that he's because it takes Kyle like 30 seconds. Sometimes less.
All right.
To figure out any major technical problem.
Our finger is over the button, Nabaki Tendo.
JustCoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority. Get 10% off. Emma, ESVN.
We spoke about the U.S. women's national team's loss and the Patriots, like Trump and Benny Johnson and Charlie Kirk cheering that on just because they're essentially women. We also reviewed the Netflix quarterback series, which was phenomenal, and gave some of our picks for rookie fantasy sleepers ahead of the season. YouTube.com/ESPN show.
You got to talk about next week. Oh, you can talk about whatever you want, but this whole thing where ESPN now in the sports thing.
I do. Yeah, I want to.
Seems a little problematic.
We're going to, look, I was, I think, a little dazzled by the ability to bet on my phone when this first started to come out. But Matt, I remember at the time said
it's going to be like the 20s again.
It's really bad.
There's going to be a major scandal. It's going to blow up in everyone's face.
But never mind a major scandal. Like
ethics
if you are, if you are a network that powerful in terms of influencing fans and owners, and you own some betting, like you're gonna.
Oh no, there's massive issues.
It's ridiculous that they're sitting Jaylen Brown. I mean, this is the big game. They got to play him. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But you get because you wanted to drive bets. There's already been a lot of.
And the
conflict of
players
interest.
are bearing the brunt of this, and
Yes.
yet like the owners can get as rich as they want off of this.
There's already been like multiple
these
altercations with players and fans. Like Bradley Beal got an altercation. One guy like bought a ticket to basically chew out Bradley Beal, saying you cost me money, and then they got an altercation as Bradley Beal tried to like leave the arena. Like gambling, I don't like it. I think it should be banned, at least it should not be encouraged by these major institutions like the leagues themselves or ESPN.
Or ESPN, yeah.
Like it's
not encouraged. They now own.
Right, exactly.
Starting their own book.
They have a financial interest in people betting, which is
sick.
It's a problem.
I mean, if you watch a game, and these regional sports networks are like struggling. Like MSG is trying to get me to pay $30 a month to pay to
just you.
Well, anybody. I mean, I haven't cut the cord yet for that reason, because like honestly, the collection of sports packages you would need to watch things legally, it's just insane. Versus just watching on cable. Yeah, I mean, just like the streaming for these sports now is insane. But we also next week we'll definitely talk about the Orioles announcer who was retaliatorily fired. But Left Reckoning, Matt. Sorry.
Yeah, Left Reckoning. We had Cale Brooks on talk about degrowth, and also in the post game, which you can get at patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Got really angry at a guy I'm calling Parasite Bet David because. He had this 6-minute clip where him and his loser friends were talking about how UPS drivers were getting paid too much. And I thought, it's one thing to, make a bunch of money, in stock trading or flipping houses. Like, you're still a parasite, but, at least it's, But it turns out that he's a Martha-level marketing guy.
This is the guy I went on his show down in Florida. And when you went on, I'm assuming he made money in Wall Street or something like that. And it's he made money with this thing called PHP, which is, scamming guys into becoming insurance salesmen for him, but they have to buy insurance themselves. It's it's low-level MLM pyramid scheme.
Yeah.
And I just the gall of certain people, the people who just buy and sell, even if it's stocks, you need to shut up about the people that actually work for a living in this country.
Well, I'll tell you what is also fascinating is you have these guys like him and Rogan who ostensibly, have this sort of aesthetic of appealing to the working class. But if you don't make $3 million a year, you're an idiot and you don't know what you're talking about.
Well, this is my
if you're actually, you're out there delivering the thing, he'd be happy to have a muffin basket, for him. Like, hey guys, thanks for sending me my packages during the COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But if they start making any money at the end of their careers,
But it's also I don't know how these guys, and it's like Rogan, him, the entire manosphere type of Andrew Tate. To me, my project is defining all of this as actually unmanly. Passive income, the idea that you're going to get ahead because you're going to buy and sell, you're going to drop ship, you're going to skim off the top of stuff, is to me so sick that's been put forward as this model of masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the exact opposite.
Passive income
it's gross.
Not manly.
It should be taxed 99%. This idea that Patrick Bet David or all these guys be I know how to. Patrick Bet David talks about how he invests in sports cars. Do you know what sports cars do? They don't appreciate in value.
Yeah.
It's insane to me. I can't believe that this is put forward as the model, and then guys coming together who drive trucks and carry heavy packages all day, getting getting six figures at the high end of the scale. That's put forward as some sort of crisis.
A guy, I don't recognize who the guy is, but some tech guy who was breaking down,
Calacanis, who's how much can they deliver? 5 to 10 packages an hour?
Exactly. And it turns out you're off by a factor of 10.
Oh my God, really? A factor of 10?
We talked about that in the post game as well.
I'll check that out.
I'm going to do some math here. It's how about do any research before?
Exactly.
But he's a venture capitalist and a startup guy. Ostensibly, he should know what he's doing when regards to doing napkin math on that business, but
He should,
no idea.
right. Well, that's the math is secondary to the not understanding what working people are going through.
Yeah, it's like Jessica Walter at Arrested Development being like, "What does a banana cost? What could a banana cost?
It was
$10?"
literally
Yeah,
that.
right.
How much could they deliver? 5 to 10 packages. It's like, first of all, he thinks of it just like Santa Claus, like in his like gated community. Like, how much are they bringing me? Like, most of these guys are delivering to like addresses where they're not only delivering things like big old brown Santa Clauses, they're also picking up packages to deliver elsewhere. Like,
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what I said last night.
Yeah, well, but
gonna-
people should still tune in.
We're going to take a brief nap, and we'll see you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it to my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them.
Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
Let's go to the IMs. Oh, it's the fun half, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
Sam, after watching that video of the brawl in Alabama for the 100th time, all I can think about is that time Tucker Carlson said white people would never gang up on someone in a fight. Curious.
Oh, right. Yeah, that was, I finally got the chance to watch that. It was electric.
White men don't fight like that. That's what he said.
Oh,
which is just
right.
an insane. I mean, that's just like a.
We should dig that up and
elite
just we should
racist thing to
like
say.
put that underneath the as an audio as like a soundtrack for that.
Mm-hmm.
Fart Twain. We have been experiencing some effects from climate change here in Southeast Alaska. For the 12th year in a row, a glacier had a lake build up from melting. Then it broke free, causing quite a bit of flooding this year.
I saw that.
Two
footage.
houses fell into a
Yep.
river and 2 new apartment buildings are now uninhabitable. Yes, I saw that up in Juneau. I think we headlined that yesterday.
But I guess those houses, you could just resell them.
Uranium interests. Sorry for last. I am. Hannah from yesterday is actually a paid policy advisor for ECFR, a EU think tank with ex-PMs, NATO secretaries, and leaders as member. Did you know that when you introduced her as just a conflict analyst or whatever? Did you know that she's no longer she no longer is paid from there? She was a visiting fellow with the Africa program. I'm going to read from her thing. On the European Council of Foreign Relations, she's a writer and policy advisor with over a decade of field-based experience in peace and security research, advocacy, North Africa and Sahel as an international crisis group senior, blah, blah, blah. She was. I don't know what else to say. She was a visiting fellow there, but allow me to read. No wonder she had great things to say about the unseated president, who is a darling of European West. Unseated president? I mean, first off, I don't think she had great things to say about it. I think she said he was a mixed bag and he was largely unpopular. I think she did say that he was the winner of a relatively somewhat dubious Democratic election.
As opposed to a coup, which is what happened. A coup happened. That's what the focus
unseated is a weird way. I mean, it's a coup.
Passive.
You may find like that it's legit in your calculation, which is fine. Honestly, I'm completely agnostic.
The IAMR doesn't quote anything that was actually said, or just characterizes it generally.
She even advocated strategic military ties. Please do more research about your guests and introduce them their interests better. Okay.
Strategic military.
Did you have a guest that you wanted us to interview on that? Silly. She was a fellow of that group. I'm sure she was a lot of things. We didn't bring them all in there, but enjoyed Matt articulating parasitic masculinity, says Dick Durbin superfan. Santos Becada. Every